Welcome to the Adult Basic Skills Professional Development video series. Throughout our productions, we are committed to excellence in adult education and professional development in basic skills instruction. The goal of this video series is to improve the effectiveness and quality of instruction through focused professional development.
LEA stands for Language Experience Approach. And this is when we take the experience base of a student and use that as the groundwork for doing language and reading experiences.
Language Experience Approach is an integrated process for teaching a beginning reader. It's a neat way to start off with a student because we can sit down and casually have a conversation with a student and listen to them talk about things that they value, things that are really important to them. And then we write down some of the things that they say. And we allow them to learn how to read what they've said. And so it's a really neat way to interact with a student, to get acquainted with, particularly for a student who's just barely beginning to learn how to read.
Today we will examine what is called the Language Experience Approach to Beginning Reading Instruction, otherwise known as LEA. The language experience approach to reading and writing is very old. In fact, many centuries ago, before the majority of society was literate, scribes wrote letters and messages for people. In a real sense, LEA takes this idea a step further by using the student's own words to form a reading lesson. LEA can be defined as a method of teaching reading and writing which involves the student dictating a narrative or experience to the instructor writing it down on paper, and building a reading lesson around the dictated narrative. While many approaches to reading begin by teaching the student abstract letters and sounds, LEA is a meaning-centered approach that focuses on the student's own ideas and interests.
It's better to use the student's own words and thoughts simply because then there is a match between the syntax and language that is used for instruction, a perfect match because it's the student's own words and syntax.
I feel like it's better to use the students' own words and thoughts in their stories because they can identify with that story much better. They also have bought into that story because it's theirs. It's something they're going to be able to remember more readily than just a trivial story out of a book.
I think it's really better to use the student's own words and thoughts, particularly if they're a beginning reader, because there's a perfect match between what they think and say and what we write down. And if they're reading what someone else has written down, it may be about topics that they're really not interested in. The sentence structure may not fit how they normally talk. And so it makes it much more difficult for them. So it's easier if we've got this nice match between the words that they just said and the words that they're learning how to read.
This strategy is appropriate for beginning readers who recognize very few or no sight words. It is not necessary to teach the names of the letters and or sounds before beginning with the language experience approach. The initial purpose is to teach some sight words and for the student to recall the words.
I especially like to use language experience approach with beginning readers. Adults who have had enormous problems learning how to read. Maybe they've tried a number of other systems and they've had lots of people trying to teach them like the letters, sounds and the names of the letters, or they've tried to just teach words in isolation. I like to work with students who've had maybe failures in every other way, and then we try language experience approach, and we usually find that it really makes a difference.
Why does LEA work? A rationale for LEA was furnished by a reading and language arts authority, Roach Van Allen. What I can think about, I can talk about. What I can talk about, I can write about or have others write for me. What I can write, I can read. LEA is successful because it values the student. It begins with the notion that the student is important and his past experiences and interests are worthy or meaningful.
LEA works because it there's a good match between a person's language and his thought and his interest and a lesson.
And I think it works because the student feels so valued. I think the student can learn to read things that are more meaningful to them quicker than they can read things that are of interest or meaning to other folks. And so I think it works so well because it says something special to the student.
LEA is very motivating to the typical adult student because it takes his own language, his own experiences, and from that you develop a lesson.
Next, let's look at a typical LEA reading lesson. First, the student and instructor engage in a conversation about something of real interest to the adult student. It may be a conversation about work, a hobby, family events, or sports. The instructor selects one or more sentences from the conversation and types or prints on paper what the student says. At this point, the instructor should not try to correct the student's vocabulary, grammar, or dialectical patterns. The dictated narrative can be long or short, depending on the free flow of ideas from the student. Select one or more sentences from the dictated narrative which seem most important to the student. It's important to remember that most adults have a hard time reading sentences that are printed in all capital letters. So be sure to print the dictated sentence or sentences using both uppercase and lowercase letters as appropriate. Next, the student and instructor read aloud the narrative together or take turns reading it. An instructor who has never used LEA will be surprised to find that an adult beginning reader can read a narrative he has just dictated. Let's take a look at what a lesson looks like using the language experience approach.
Tell me some of the kinds of things you do in your spare time.
I like to work with wood.
Okay.
I like to fish a lot.
Oh.
I like to trout fish. I
Okay.
fly fish.
I've just written down what you just said here. I like to fish. Okay, read that for me.
Okay, I like to fish.
Okay. Now that's one of the ways we can help you learn how to read better is just to listen to you talk about things that are important to you, and then we write down what you say, and then you learn how to read what you've said. I just find I can do it a lot better if I just cut these things apart and just move them around and put them back together. So here's the word I like
I see what you're doing
to fish. Now we'll mix them up and we'll do it this way. So we'll move it right under that, like, and you do the rest of it. Okay?
here. To
Okay.
fish.
All right, that's good. That's good, James. You do the whole thing. Okay, James, let's look again. This is what we start off with. I like to fish. And now I got it typed up. And this will be easier for us to learn because this looks just like it would in a book. I like to fish. All right, so here we go. I like to fish. Okay, and that's just See how that matches there? I like to fish. Let me take this away, and then let's mix these things up. Now let's do that again. You do the next one. Okay, that's fish. Okay, all right. Let's look at this together. Okay, does this look like this one?
It's different.
Okay,
Thing
so
on the top there.
that's right. So this is
That's fish.
that goes down in here. Okay, now let's get the others. Okay,
I like
good.
to fish.
Good deal. Good deal. All right. Now that's okay. So, but this will help us in case you get them a little confused. Then you can pull them back out, and that's a good way to do it. You just use this as sort of your sample. And here again we go.
Okay. I like
Good. Good.
to fish.
Good. Now later you're gonna have several of these. You're gonna have a whole group of these, and then sometimes it's sort of easy to forget what the sentence is. So what would probably help us now if you just sort of draw little stick figures or whatever, so you can remember what that sentence is.
You got a picture of someone fishing?
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Okay. Let's see.
Good. Wow, you're really good at this. It looks like you just caught a big one too.
Okay.
Super. So when you got 10, 15, see, as we keep adding and adding and adding to these things, then if you can't quite remember what that sentence is, then you just look at that picture and say, yeah, I like to fish. I remember what that is. That's I like to fish. Okay, and we put these pieces on the inside, and you get them out and practice them. I find that students sometimes they come in shy, but I like to try to get them to talk about things that they do on weekends, or things that they do after work, or things they enjoy doing with their family. I find that they enjoy talking about themselves as we build this rapport and they trust us. That they just open up and they want to tell about things that they value. Sometimes they don't have people in their life who stop long enough to listen to them.
Well, LEA can present a management problem, particularly if you're doing an LEA with one student and you have several in your class to instruct, several other students to instruct. You will have to plan some other activities, independent activities for the students while you work one-on-one with an LEA.
After the LEA lesson, type or print the LEA words, one word to a 3x5 card. The 3x5 LEA word cards now become the student's personal word bank for reading, writing, and spelling activities. LEA words should be reinforced through all kinds of reading drills, games, and writing activities. This is the instructor's chance to be creative and discover new ways of providing instruction for the student.
There are a lot of activities that you can use from the sentences and the paragraphs that the student dictates and that we write down. And one of those activities is just to put the key words on a 3x5 card and keep them in a box or a word bank. And later we use those words. I prefer to type them. I think that's better transfer. But we keep those words in an alphabetical list so they learn how to alphabetize things. They also, in this word bank, will keep words that they're working on, that they're trying to learn to recognize instantly.
As the new reader has success with reading the LEA narratives, the instructor introduces beginning level books and materials which are of interest to the reader. It's now time to begin a gradual transition from LEA to reading published material. Remember, this may be a slow transition, not something that happens overnight.
With LEA, it's fairly simple to document improvement simply because you can look at the lessons. At first, the student may dictate only a sentence or two or three. Gradually, you can see the length of the LEA lesson gets much longer, but also there's a complexity of sentence structure usually that takes place, and also the word selection.
The language experience is a process for taking down what the student says, and so by keeping copies of their language experience sentences and eventually paragraphs and eventually stories, keeping them in a folder, the student can see very readily the progression.
I use anecdotal records where I have students' names on cards, and I have on those cards the specific skills, the specific types of lessons that I want to do with them. And as we go through the lessons, then I make notes on those cards to indicate what we have done, to indicate their level of progress, if we need to do more, if we need to expand that to another area. I will also make notes if a student says, I think I need to do such and such as a result of a problem they've experienced in LEA, then I write those sorts of things on the cards. I also keep these cards open to the students. I do not pretend that it's something secretive that I have just because I'm the instructor, but this is about them.
A person's language is very personal. Everyone speaks his own dialect of English. Some people use regional pronunciation patterns, while others employ their particular syntax, and everyone chooses some words over other words. As a matter of fact, a person and his language are one and cannot be separated. Criticism of a person's language may be construed as an attack on the person. So how do we go about correcting our student's mistakes without making him feel self-conscious?
I do not correct students' grammar as we are doing in LEA. For one reason, this is one of the areas that they need to work on through the LEA. And so when we are first putting the words up, those words are put as closely as I can remember to the ones the students give me. Then as we work through, we will use what needs to be corrected in the grammar as an extension of that lesson, or perhaps an entirely different lesson.
Most experts would agree that grammar should not be corrected directly. And in an LEA lesson, you correct the grammar and the mismatches of proper English structure indirectly, not confrontational with the student, but between lessons you make the copy that's corrected, so you begin the next lesson with a nice LEA that has a good grammar, and you have the student read the corrected copy. And by modeling yourself as an instructor good English and having him read good English, that's the way the matter is handled in terms of correcting grammar.
I usually don't like to correct very much when I'm doing language experience approach. To give you an example, I heard this story about a student says, look out there, that dog ain't got no front arm. Now a good response to that would be, yes, why do you think that dog doesn't have a front leg? That'd be a much better way to respond to them. So you just say back to them in standard English rather than say, you used a double negative and dogs don't have arms, and we want to be real careful, particularly with adults, because they're typically very sensitive. So we correct, not in a direct way, but in an indirect way by just saying back to them what they've said in standard English, but not making a big deal out of it.
Up to this point, we've been discussing the use of LEA with one student. LEA works well with a group of adults who are on or about the same instructional reading level. Let's look at a typical group LEA. First, the instructor provides the group with an interesting experience. The common experience may be a story or poem read by the instructor, an interesting film or videotape, a guest speaker, a news story, or current event. The instructor leads the group in a lively discussion about the experience and discusses new concepts and vocabulary meaning. Using a chalkboard or chart paper, the instructor asks each student to share something about the experience, and the instructor writes down their sentences. Finally, the group or an individual reads aloud the entire LEA narrative several times. The instructor uses the group LEA to provide additional reading, spelling, and writing activities and lessons.
I would suggest that the people who make up the reading group do not have to be on the exact reading level, but they should be near it. If there is a big disparity between the group in terms of their ability, it might cause some problems for some of the students, especially the ones on the low side.
In summary, let's review some of the advantages of using LEA. Number 1, LEA centers on the unique knowledge and personal experiences that are most meaningful to the learner. Number 2, LEA involves the 4 primary avenues of language: reading, writing, listening, and speaking. Number 3, LEA emphasizes personal worth of students by demonstrating an understanding for the learner and enhancing self-concept. The language experience approach is a very powerful reading method for instructors to use with beginning readers because it builds on the student's unique background of experiences and current use of language. For the beginning reader, LEA is non-threatening, motivational, and it works.
LEA works for me. I have used it with adults and find it one way to build that bonding relationship that aids in the total instruction of the class.
The student that I tutor on a regular basis, I frequently use LEA with him, and we have a lot of fun with it.
When I first used it, I really felt it would work because I had used it for years with children and found it to be so successful. But we as adults need the same encouragement that children need when we are learning. And so I have found it to work.